Welcome, everybody. This is Scott Park Phillips, and today I'm interviewing Maija Soderholm about her new book, and she's interviewing me about my new book. And yeah, I have her book on Kindle. So her book is called The Hustler: Swordplay and the Art of Tactical Thinking. She also, before that, wrote a book called The Liar, the Cheat, and the Thief. Uh, and my previous book actually is here too. My current book, Tai Chi, Baguazhang, and the Golden Elixir, Internal Martial Arts Before the Boxer Uprising. And my first book was Possible Origins, A Cultural History of Chinese Martial Arts, Theater, and Religion. Here, I can pull this one off the shelf. That's Maija's other book. So, ta-da. And by way of introduction here, I've actually known Maija since we were babies in our 20s.
It's true.
And well, we didn't really become friends until we both did a Rory Miller workshop about, it seems like 15 years ago, but maybe we can put a date on it. Like 2008, 2010, something like that.
No, it wasn't that long ago, surely. We're not that old.
2011. Okay. Yeah, it was that long ago. And Maija and I both have a deep love of Chinese martial arts and talking about them. And talking about culture and people and problems. And so everyone should know we actually had a kind of practice of having coffee for 3 hours, every few weeks for several years. So
That's right. Yes.
And we don't live in the same place now, but I guess I should apologize if we go too fast because we know each other. We'll try to slow down for the rest of the world. Well, why don't we don't have a plan here. You should know we're both improvisers and chaos theorists, and we are going to.
One of the things we have in common, Scott, is our love of improvisation and the idea of the meta system. I think of instead of trying to make uncertainty certain, of getting comfortable with uncertainty. And it's one of the things I enjoy talking to you about because our backgrounds are quite different and we disagree on stuff. So it's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, my background is that at 15, I studied with this guy Keith Johnstone, who wrote a book called Impro, and it completely messed me up. It's a book about theater, but it's really about how you just should reverse everything anybody tells you. And if you want to actually figure out how things work, just reverse them. And
you could be a bit more clear about that than that, because I think some of the ideas about what you have to do, what successful improvisation is, I think is very important.
Well, the first rule of improvisation is accept all offers.
Yes, great.
And so that means you actually have to see things as they are. And that actually takes practice, and it takes practice because we live in our delusions. And so you have to do practices to, in some sense or another, to clear away delusions, simply to see things as they are, which is also probably the first rule of Taoism, called ziran in Chinese, to things as they are. You could say seeing things as they are, experiencing things as they are. And so accept all offers doesn't mean necessarily saying yes, but it means not denying what's happening. It means going with the flow is how the hippies phrased it. And what's the second rule of improvisation?
I can't remember. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not too important. There's lots of other rules of improvisation. And
But I think that, do you think that that's a really good defining rule? I mean, it ties in so much with the Filipino martial art training that I got with Sonny Umpad, where his whole system, the way he described it, was, I'm not teaching you, I'm not, it's like you're learning how to see. I'm teaching you to see. I'm not teaching you stuff. And I think that's about seeing actuality in the moment, not assuming, not it was actually really seeing and being in that moment. So that's why that improvisation again is, the first is, yes, this is happening. Yes, this is happening. Now what, right?
Right. Well, the second set of rules, right, is actually about submission and domination, or what Keith Johnson calls status. But so that does really tie in. Let's actually talk a little bit about the normal way martial arts seem to be taught is with this memorization and pattern establishing patterns, and a right way and a wrong way, and you Sunny Upad taught what you called a meta system, right? A system outside of a system. And it's very similar to what I'm saying about that if you actually understand the Chinese martial arts in their historic context, you'll automatically do that.
Yes, but I think that I think process is a really interesting thing. I mean, it would seem that my love of bagua, which is riven with form work, and my system, for instance, has 8 small palm changes, 8 big palm changes, Wulong byway that sits on the end of there, and then 64 straight line forms. It's very, there's this, and then there's that, and then there's the thing afterwards, which seems to be the complete opposite of how Sunny taught. So in the end, you're meant to let go of the forms. But I think, to me, the question is always, as in music, you learn how to play scales and you get attributes, but really you want to play jazz. If that's the end goal is the improvisation, is the jazz, but how much of the other stuff do you need to learn how to let go of it? I mean, I think that's a really fascinating question. And do you need any of it at all? And what is little and what is too much,
Well, in the Chinese context, right, we have this modernization movement, which attempts to crush the theatrical and the religious traditions right after the Boxer Uprising. And it's very effective. And there's this one of the people who really is part of that movement, but also was attempting to save many of the older traditions that he saw dying, was Wang Shenzai, who created Yiquan, which was a combination of the Tai Chi, Baguazhang, Xingyi, and other things he learned, Tongbai, these other systems. And he, he's famous for being anti-forms. Of course, he learned a ton of forms himself early on, tons of forms, right? And then claims nobody needs them because he's essentially saying, I can teach you the master key, which is fascinating, except that forms do so many things that I could really get into talking about the positivities of form. But I think the really key connecting concept in forms is that you learn how to look at someone else's body and make your own body do that thing. And you learn to do it over and over and over and repeatedly and skillfully and fast, and then to make it your own, right?
Yeah, and I think of it more as an imagination expander. That it's a lot more about transitions, is that you're learning a whole bunch of different attributes, right? You're learning efficiency and balance and power generation, and you know how to jump and land and do the next thing and not fall over, and how much your body twists in one direction before you go the other way, how to make that seamless. So in a sense, you're also learning about yourself. Now you're learning about your own cadence and your own body. That's all about the length of your limbs and your muscle mass and your height and all those things. It's that calibration. You're learning sort of to calibrate within yourself and then you're learning how to calibrate outside yourself. I mean, for me, one of the real interesting things about what separates martial arts from dance in a lot of ways, or some, let's say a health practice like yoga or something like that, is that there's a bunch of health practices that involve some kind of movements that is all about you. It's you and gravity and other stuff, but it's pretty much about you and your own physiology. But what makes martial arts separate is there's always someone else. You can't have a martial art without something else. So you have to affect the world. It's like learning to sledgehammer without hitting something. It's like the reason why you have it in your hand and what you're trying to do is because you want the power to come out of the sledgehammer to hit them, you know.
But this isn't necessary if you're
be another one.
Oops, we paused there. We better check that. I missed the last thing you said. Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying that it's about relationship. So it's not about me and my sledgehammer in the air learning about sledgehammers. The sledgehammer has a job to hit a spike into the ground. So I need to use my body in an efficient way if I want to do it for an hour in a certain sense where I get the spike into the ground, you know, using my body in this object, you know. So martial arts is like the movements are affecting the world on the outside. It's about the relationship between the two things. It's not just about me getting my channels open or something.
Yeah, all that health stuff, I will just go on record as saying it's bullshit. Hello, that's my name. That's to put that on my gravestone. I don't buy it for a second. Like, that's just not, those are ahistoric and acultural, like, modernizations that will die because they don't have value, or they don't have enough value. Okay, that was as strong a statement as I'm going to make, but I want to follow on what you said.
And I'm going to disagree with you mildly about that, so let's wrap around after you've said.
Oh yeah, we'll do a loop back. I know you better than you know yourself. This is the ideal strategy. This is the summary of strategies. And you talk about this in your book as a key thing. It's also written in the Tai Chi classics. Like, I can beat you because I know you better than you know yourself. And I can only do that because I know myself. I only know that because I know all the mistakes that I make.
Yeah, and these kind of things where I'm using my own body, right, is the same as when you're using it on somebody else.
Well, and that's part of why you do forums, to find out if that's true, right? Because you have to know it. You can't just believe it, right? And the I just to follow on that dance thing, like, dance is deeply the same. It is all about the audience. It is all about the music. It is all about the other people. It is all about the space itself.
Well, it's communication, isn't it?
It's so much more. It's about the ancestors. I mean, like, you know, you get into talking about rhythm and toward the end of your book, and in a couple of places in your book, and it's really important for why it's so important for dueling and reading. Your whole idea, we should get into the idea of reading and writing. You read the other person is to see the other person. To write them is to make them do something. And, you know, I've been doing a lot of Ghanaian dance. I got invited to join a Ghanaian dance company here in Boulder at age 52. And it's you know, and these people are national treasures in Ghana. They were part of the national dance company that toured the world, and they happened to settle here in Boulder. And so, you know, when they're drumming, right, they're playing these rhythms, and the rhythms are complex. They fit together. They're all these pieces, right? And one characteristic that is associated with ancestors, the two characteristics are the pull and the empty space. And so as a dancer, you know, you're dancing on the beat, right? Your feet are landing on the downbeat, right? But there's a pull. There's this pull. If the drummers are good, there's a pull, and it's entrainment, they call it. You know, this entrainment, and as a dancer, you have to use counter entrainment to not be pulled off, because it will pull you off the rhythm.
Off where?
Off the rhythm. It'll pull you into chaos. It will pull you into disorientation, and you'll lose the rhythm. if you're trained by it. And so a good rhythm actually has that pull. A proper African rhythm has that pull. It also has something called the open space, or I'm going to call it the open space, which is that you're dancing, you have the downbeat and you have the upbeat, right? There's something, there's a downbeat and an upbeat, and then there's and you're actually, it's not where you're stepping and it's not when you're not stepping, it's something else. And you find it and you click into it, and you're doing polyrhythms in your body. You're not doing a single rhythm, right?
So if you're very successful at that, is that what good dancing is? Like somebody that's highly skilled is because they have that, or can they sort of master that space?
Oh yeah, I would say yes and no. I'd say you're not really dancing if you're not doing that. Not really. I mean, so the English word for that is swing. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Or in Brazilian, Jenga, right? Jenga is the technique used for going back and forth. It literally means swing. So it's the same concept that you feel the pull and the empty space. Or you could call it the stall, right? If it's a swing, right? It has a pull and has a stall.
Yeah, right? Yeah. We talk about the cusps of motion, right? Yeah. And if you hit them right, then you get the...
Right. Well, you're playing in that realm, right? You're at play in that realm, and then you're free, right? And yes, you're transmitting that to the audience, and yes, you're doing that. You're connecting with the other people through that empty space
because they can feel it too.
Yeah. Yes, it's the same rhythm. You're both.
So, what is that communication that you're getting when you play there, when you find it, and then the audience are like, that's got swing?
Oh, I don't know. You could call it the ancestors. Modern people tend to be hesitant about even naming it. And because I've been doing this Ghana thing, I know it's a distraction, but we can easily tie it back to the Chinese and Filipino traditions. They're indirect, culturally indirect, so they just don't say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting. I'm actually going to be co-teaching a form to flow class with another martial artist called Bobby Edmonds.
Yeah.
And his background is in Silat, and he talks about the Silat forms, you know, and how his teacher would get on his case because he's all like, you're just doing the by rote thing. It's like, you got to dance it. It's like, you don't have the swing, I guess, right? And so, of course, it goes through every culture, this idea of kind of being in the groove or getting it, you know. Being alive, that's another word for it, right? Is sort of aliveness within the form, you know, or the movement.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you see a theater performance, right, and it's like they didn't miss any of their lines, you know, and the narrative, you know, they told the narrative straight from Greek tragedy, and you're like, yawn, right? I mean, it's obviously we're missing something, but what was it? What were they missing?
So can we bring this back? Because I think it's really interesting, because in your book, you talk about theater and how much of Chinese theater is relating these stories of the gods that are very well known. So it's almost like the same retelling of a story, but that how the improvisation of that story with that particular performance, with that particular troupe, is the interesting part. You think that improvisation in the form of the play, like the play itself could be the idea of form, and then the improvisation within it that actually makes it live or not is actually what we're calling, you know, the swing, giving it some swing.
100%. 100%. You weren't a performer unless you could improvise.
And so does that, but you could improvise badly, right? So, I mean, there is a skill in doing it well.
And the audience will tell you.
Yeah. You know, if I look at my culture with the Kalevala, which was, you know, just a spoken set of songs, really, that this guy learned, you know, compiled into a book and kind of put into an order he wove a story through it. But really it was at, you know, the beginning of the 1800s, and he was going around collecting these oral stories that were still being sung. So who knows what it used to be, but regardless, so he collected all these together. But the traditional way that they were sung or passed from each other, because again, there's this cast of characters that appears through all the songs and that are fairly consistent, that then they sing about. And there's certain
We're talking about Finland.
Yes, Finland, the Kalevala.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so, but the way they do them is that these singers, these people would go from village to village and get invited in, and they'd sit on these benches, and the local village would also have a singer, with their guy, right? And they would sit next to each other and hold hands. And if you look at the structure of the poems, all of them, they all go with this idea where one person will say the line, and the person that they're holding hands with would repeat the line, but with a bit of improv in it. So maybe the first person will say, Vainamoinen came over the hill. And then the second guy, Vainamoinen appeared, in the valley or whatever, right? So there's some sort
with
of
red shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's how the stories then evolved, and how they were also remembered by the person participating, maybe hearing something new because they were coming up with, part of the story too. It's a really sort of interesting parallel, the idea of this framework of something, but then within it, this sort of freedom to play. And obviously the people that were considered the highest skill, and in Finland, in the myths, singing was magic. So you could actually sing people into the ground and bury them, like they would slowly start sinking into the ground if your words were really, really, your song was really, really good. Yeah. And how that is sort of related to, again, the swing of the words that you were using.
Yeah, China had this also had all a great deal of magic in words, and the the convention. There are a lot of different conventions, like for how stories are remembered. One is if you're just getting lyrics, you would have a stack of coins, and because maybe this is a 6-hour play, and there's a lot of lyrics, right? A lot of sung or spoken language. So each line is a coin. So I say the line, and I put the coin down, and you say the line until you got it, and then I take another coin, I say the line, and so we're doing sort of transferring the coins across the table, and when you got through it, then and then so you're remembering it as segments of information that are in a sequence, and so they're actually just like forms. And so for the other way this was done was through martial arts forms, right? Basically,
right.
Each movement is a name, is a sequence of a story. It's like they're also called prompt. When they started writing this down, they called them prompt books. So you have a 1,000-page book, which is a collection of 100 plays, right? All on the topic of strategy, for instance. What the Three Kingdoms is entirely about strategy, and you have and Sworn Brotherhoods, but other than that, it's basically a strategy book, and each one. And so to remember it, you just remember, basically you're remembering the titles, but the titles are a physicality. So you're doing this one, and then you're doing this one, and then you're doing this one, right? It's like each one represents a section in a story.
Yeah, so it's like those memory devices where people create houses, so it's just a memorization device. Yeah. And that's very common, true for Chinese medicine. There was always the song of whatever. I remember the Iron Monkey movie, and the kids always kind of sing the song, And I think that, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously in the first book, you talk about Taiji form and, that as kind of a memorization device. So I'm curious what you think about the bagua, because we can now circle back to martial arts in your book, the bagua forms, because originally apparently there was only one. Like if we do believe that Dong Hai Chuan popularized at least some method that he passed on, and before that, you go into the history a little bit, or the potential history about what people were up to, but we don't really know what, why do you think the movements look like they do? I mean, do you think they're all modern, inventions, or are they did they get, invented and practiced for reasons that have older reasons, I guess, than the modern kind of, pure martial arts reasons for them?
Well, what I think from my own practice is sort of is probably truer, but it's slightly different answer from what I can say historically. So let me answer the question historically and then personally. we don't know if there were any forms. The likelihood that Deng Haichuan taught forms is completely unknown. It's anywhere between 0 and 100, completely
Did he
unknown.
do this? Walk
We
around tree?
know, okay, we have this one thing, which is a tombstone, which if it wasn't a forgery, which there's no way for us to know, but if it wasn't a forgery, it was carved in 18, I forget the year,
It's in the book.
70. Yeah, it's in my book, 1873, I think it was. And so it was carved then, and at that time, uh, he must have had hundreds of students just based on the list of people he passed things down to. And it describes him taking a trip, taking his students on a trip to the Great Wall, and he takes a challenge from people with spears, and he spins around like a whirlwind, like Naja, like the god Naja, who's basically the god of the whirlwind. And so we have that, and that's it for Deng Haichuan. And so my historical view is that what got created and preserved were these forms. The different lineages created forms. That's why they're all different. Created these forms in order to hold on to the quality of movement, which was established initially by being Naja, by performing Naja. And so that's my historical explanation. My personal explanation is that there's no form movement that I can't create spontaneously out of just playing with some key movements. Like they all just appear spontaneously.
But that's because you've been practicing for how long?
Yeah, for 30 years. But it's this thing, right? I already know how to use it, so I don't get stuck in that. I'm just playing with movement. And yeah.
Okay, so what I'm fascinated by is it's the only martial art that goes round and around in a freaking circle. It's weird. It's very singular, odd thing to do. And then, of course, it's very difficult to know exactly, just because the numerology in China is a very strong pattern to slot things into, the 5 of this and the 8 of that and the 64 of these. So we don't really know if that's important or not in the sense of it being complete, but there's kind of a completeness in theories. And I'm really curious about this idea of 2 times 2 times 2 being 8. So this idea of opposites. So you've got in, out, up, down, center to periphery, or whatever you want to do, or left, right, or however you want to say it. Like there's 3 planes that have opposites. So if you do that, there's 8. Yep. And this idea of there's something to practice for each of those ideas with sort of transitions in them. Like they came up with this idea of if you do all that, that's complete. And I'm very interested in why. It's like circle. Why are we walking around in circles? So obviously having that background with nature is good, but it has to work for it to continue too.
Well, it's a convention of the theater. I mean, absolutely conventional. You go to the smallest village in the middle of nowhere, and they're using the same convention of the 9 squares, right? The 9 palaces, or which is absolutely. I could go into the mythology, and we could just talk about that for 2 hours. Yeah. But it's a way of organizing space and time.
Yes.
And so you just described organizing a martial art around space and time. So there's no jump. You don't need a reason. You're already there. If you're doing a theatrical art, everybody already knows this. All the audience already knows this, because you can't even watch a Chinese opera play without knowing this. You can't understand it. It's key information. So everybody already knows this. So it's already in the martial art when you start. You're a kid. It's already there.
But I would say the Chinese are very pragmatic people. They I think that there's.
What?
Well, maybe you don't.
I think that's just a 20th century claim, and there's zero pragmatism. But go ahead, give it a shot.
Okay, so you and I, just to explain to everybody else who doesn't know, have a person in common called Liu Ming, who was your Taoist teacher for a very long time, and who I was an unofficial looker in of. I won't say I was an official student of his, though I definitely followed his teachings and I thought he was amazing, and we were friends to a certain degree. I ended up doing some art pieces for his house and stuff, not like paintings, but doing some painting work for him and doing some stuff. And so I got to hang out with him a little bit, and he was incredibly fascinating.
And I studied with him like really intensively for about 10 years before that.
Yeah, you're much more full on than me. My personal interest was in the feng shui element. So, you know, his pragmatic way of talking about almanacs and the Zhou, which is his word for the I Ching.
I Ching and the Tong Shu. Yeah.
And his idea of wisdom science as where are you and when are you? Like, where are you is feng shui, when are you is the, you know, the I Ching. Do you know what I mean? Like that pragmatism and that practicality, I think that it's very, it underlies everything. There's reason, you know, for it.
There's no reason. So I mean, and that's a key idea, right? Is that we have decided like that linear thinking and reason are superior to every other type. That's the Enlightenment, right? Are superior to every other type of experience. And you and I are in rebellion against that fundamentally by just saying, I think there's something we can experience that is closer to what life worth living is all about. And just to sort of nail that coffin, put the nail in that coffin. I could go on this one too, but so the Tongshu, or the what you call the almanac, right, is one of its functions is it shows the auspices and the inauspices. So it's a good day to get a haircut, it's a bad day to get a haircut, right? And it's a calendar. So it's a good day to do an interview, it's a bad day to do an interview. You know, it's a good day to mow your lawn, it's a bad day to mow your lawn. They're laid out in terms of what people do. And so you can get, and there are multiple interlocking mathematical things. So if you don't like this thing you're looking at, there's another one in there you could look at, right? So it has a lot of optionality, but you could also look at 5 of them and go, whoa, they all line up. This is the day to get married. You know, let's do it.
Yeah, but to me, I don't like good and bad or auspicious and inauspicious. I much prefer maybe smoother and more difficult. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like with it, or you're fighting against something.
That's very rational of you. I wasn't going to go there.
That's okay. You don't have to go there.
What I was going to say is that I actually did this practice for several years. I can show you the calendars and stuff, and me writing my little notes in there. I saved them because it was a lot of fun. I just basically stopped making rational decisions and started following the calendar. I just cut myself off from that whole process, and it was amazing. I had enormous amounts of energy. I didn't have to it freed up things because I had been trying to figure out when a good day to get a haircut was. You have no idea how much energy that takes. And if you just stop doing it and just follow the calendar, it frees you up. And no, it's not rational.
But yeah, and for me, I'm like the opposite. I love the fact that I see cycles. Like sometimes I drive out of my house, everybody's driving like an asshole, you know, like everywhere. You know, it's one thing after another. I'm like, what is it with today? So then I've got this thing in my head is like, okay, today's driving like an asshole day. And I start watching for it. And if there is, and if I'm right or not, right? And sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not. And so I think it's interesting that there's different days where things, you know, are different from each other. I won't say better or worse, but just kind of, you know, there's one day that I'll get green lights everywhere and everything will be easy. Like everything. And it's just like, it doesn't matter to me. It's not important. Like, I don't need to know when to cut my hair. I'm going to go when the appointment's convenient. Mm-hmm. But then if it's like a weird day and everything's preventing me from going, I'm just all like, well, that was interesting. You know, I'm not
Maija, that's the observational part, right? You're describing the observational part. And that's absolutely like that's like a passive observational thing, which is super valuable too. But it's different than I'm going to do it. There's no reason for it. And what happens, right? So there are two sides of it, right? It's like, I'm going to do this. So let me put it another way, because I think this comes up is a sort of key thing about martial arts that we both are engaged with, is like, what is the purpose of training? Because people train a really long time and they're still crap, right? And we even know that about ourselves. Like, that thing I've been trying to get, and I keep trying and I'm not getting it, right? And then what happens, like what happens to training? You hit this key, like something happens. I like to think of it as a reversal or an inversion or a flipping inside out or something like that. I like to think of it spatially. But whatever happens, you could call it you could call it a key, and you're like, it unlocks something. Maybe it's an absence. Maybe the training shows you something that you just actually can't be seen. It can't be felt. And suddenly you have the thing, and then you don't need the training anymore, right? The calendar is like that.
Yeah, I mean, Chinese culture is very interesting. It's very old. They've been keeping records for a really long time. They like the idea of writing things down and, referring to the past and seeing if they can learn from these cycles, And you can put as much, of your belief in it or not, and that's you. I always like Ming's whole thing. It's like, what do you mean that if you believe it, it's going to work? Who do you think you are? It just already is. It's like incredible hubris to think that it'll only happen if you believe it. You're not that important. It's all just going on anyway. You've got to let go of it, which I really liked.
Well, that helped me understand Judaism too, because Judaism functions the same way. It's not constructed around belief. Any ritual tradition, it's like you do the ritual. Nobody actually, everybody's interested in why you dip the parsley in the salt water. Like, everyone wants to talk about it, but who cares? You still have to do it and eat it. Maybe the parsley's envy and salt is, sexual lust or something. It could be anything. And people have people have written whole, books on why you do that. But it's still just a ritual, and Chinese culture is structured around rituals, not beliefs. That's Lu Ming's kind of key idea.
Right. And I think that's really good. But bringing it back to martial arts, like you just did a little bit, I think. Why do we practice was the question, right?
Yeah. Why do we train? I was making a distinction there between practice, which could be improvising.
I think there's the part of that's personality. For me, I don't know. And I'm quite happy with the fact that I don't know, but I do it, and apparently I'm still doing it. So look, I've been doing it for a long time. I'm not trying to get anywhere with it. I'm sure I kind of want to be Egg Shen when I grow up. There's part of me that really believes that I want to be some crazy Taoist in, Big Trouble in Little China, who owns a herb shop but has like a little gateway to, a different universe underneath, and who has the 6 demon bag. There's part of me that actually really wants to believe that on some level, but I'm happy to hold it in my mind that it's complete bollocks at the same time. But I think it's however I rationalize it, I practice, and it kept me, all I know is I practiced and it kept me interested in it enough to keep doing it. And I'm still doing it. And I don't know why, but that's okay. Like, I'm not trying to be a good fighter. It's nice to feel skilled and have attainment, but I don't think in the end it really matters, honestly. I think if I was really in a different life, that my life was super dangerous, I don't think I'd train martial arts.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, so that's the problem, right? That's the crux of the problem. I disagree with you, but then you said that, so then I have to agree with you. I disagree. I'm like, no, it's all about like I as a Zhuang practitioner, right? Type of meditation, sitting and forgetting. I practice dissolving all purpose for sure. Like, just discarding purpose is a great thing to do, and practicing forms and traditions empty is that. It already is that practice. That's where it comes from. That's where Zen comes from. And so, but I can also practice the golden elixir, which is all about visualization and the animation of the space around me. And it is about fruition, and it is about the it is about the things that change. resolving back to your original nature and discovering the inner animal and the predator there becoming more expressive. All of these things are very alive for me and very meaningful. But what was that last thing that made me then agree with you?
I said I didn't think they were about, like, if I wanted to learn how to fight, I wouldn't.
Oh yeah, but that's my whole point from the beginning, right? I'm 20. I've been studying martial arts since I was 10. But at 20, I was a dancer. I was trying to, it was just wild time in San Francisco, and I was dancing all the time, and I started doing martial arts partly because so many male teachers were dying because of AIDS. So I started doing all this martial arts, and it's just I'm just a body guy, like all the time, body stuff, 8 hours a day. And I'm hearing this story about what Chinese martial arts are. At the same time, I'm hearing stories about what Indian dance is, Kathak, the North Indian classical dance that I study, or Congolese dance from a teacher from the Congo named Malunga. And Chitras Das was my Indian dance teacher. And I had several different martial arts teachers, Bing Gong and George Shu, or two major forces in the beginning. And I'm hearing all these stories about where these things come from, and none of this is lining up because I'm cross-training culturally, right? And so I'm going, you guys both have this and you have a completely different explanation for it. And neither explanation really works, right? So this sort of thing that martial arts is for fighting, I'm like, clearly you could do that, but it's clearly a theatrical tradition. And there's all this stuff which seems to be about how you experience the world, right? Which is much more the realm of religion. So I had that problem when I started studying with Liu Ming. I was like, can you help me solve this problem? Because I love these arts, but the story just does not line up with reality. And he liked that challenge. He didn't have an answer, but he got me going.
Well, I mean, for me, I'm good with the sword and I can beat people. So obviously it does work to a certain level, right? So it was useful. But I think at its core,
you beat me with the sword, I'll just say.
That what I think is interesting and is common with what you're saying and what my experience is, that what I've come to realize I'm actually fascinated by is understanding people. Like, that is what martial arts gives me. It gives me an understanding of, like, what is this thing? What can I, do with it? Oh, look at that. It moves like this. But then also other people. It's like martial arts. I think it was Rory Miller that talked about, violent encounters basically saying no. It's like a physical way of saying no. Like, it's a disagreement at its most pointy end, shall we say. And so, like an improvisation in a certain way, even though you kind of want to be in the moment, it's like you saying yes and me saying no. And then it's like, what are you going to do about it? Right. And so it's a way to understand people. Martial arts is sort of the ultimate way to understand relationship and understand people. And so I didn't realize, a long time ago when I started doing the movements, that that's actually probably what I'm interested in. And that's why the book has a lot to do with that. It's like, oh, look, when I do this, they do that. Oh, well, that's interesting, or how do I make them do something else? And all these different layers that you can play with people, including that, esoteric space that is about ritual and belief and culture and history,
Let's dig into that a little bit. So you sort of lay out in your book this idea that there's hunting, and then there's like just killing, and those require overwhelming force or incredible element of surprise, basically. And then you have this idea of, the great fighter, which requires, some kind of mental ability. And you kind of lay it out as, reticence, secrecy, deception, knowing your place, knowing the place and the culture, being able to read the situation, that those kind of mental capacities actually make you a much, much, much better fighter. And so then you ask the question, where did martial arts, what is it's a similar question to my question, actually. It's like, why did people decide to create this thing? Because this is way more complex than solving that other problem. Than that, how can I be a good fighter? It's a way more complicated question. So where did it come from? Why did they create martial arts?
Well, we have sorry, my dog's behind me. I'm sort of checking out what she's up to. My whole thing, that the book explains, is that it's not that hard to take another life, not psychologically speaking, but physically speaking, if your target is just standing there and doing nothing. So really, there's no skill involved in this. And if there's 10 of me and 1 of you, not that hard. If we surprise you, fantastic, right? Like, there's not a lot of skill there. That there's some skills about stealth maybe, but that's really all it takes. It's like, I have a pointy object and I stick it through you in a squishy place, and it's like curtains, right? It's not hard. So with my pragmatic, obviously more modernist view of things than yours, is that I think that martial arts were invented so people didn't die. So it was actual ways of protecting themselves, which might tie in a little bit to your invulnerability skills, honestly. So that there's only reason for martial art because you want to live. If we pick just a one-on-one scenario and I'm going to kill you, and I don't care if I die or not, again, it's not really that hard. The hard part is getting away with it, is to do it and not die in the process. And so martial arts were actually invented as a way to not die.
Okay, but what about this symmetry asymmetry problem?
What's that?
That the moment a battle, a moment we equalize, because you do so in a tit for tat situation, you do something, I do something, you do something, right? Maybe we're villages, maybe we're people, we're in this dominant submission thing. We're both trying to survive, or 10 villages trying to survive. We'll tend to equalize power. I'll try to up a little, but if I up too much, then 5 villages attack. So
maybe.
Yeah, but I mean, that is the history of humans interacting. So there's this tendency to end up in a symmetrical battle with dominance. With that's how you get stability. Is right that we're not going to attack them because they're almost equal to us. We're just going to stay separate. So you have the development of warfare worldwide where people are doing this to move towards symmetry. And if I want to win, I need asymmetry.
Yes, but I think the world has always been an asymmetric place, and it is a cycle of finding weakness in your neighbors, taking it over, and then grabbing them to your side so you grow in strength. And the stronger you grow, the more people are going to join your side because they don't want to be on the weak side. So then you have all of it, say, in your little neighborhood, and then, or your area of the world, you have this sort of massive empire, and then the tendency is always for that to get big, and then you lose control over it, and everybody splits up, and it goes chaotic again, and everybody's small again. Sometimes you do get 2 separate places, rising up and, getting super powerful, and then, they've got all their allies around them, and they've got all their allies around them, and then there's nothing for a while. Until some sort of instability comes in again. It's like, it's sort of impossible. I don't think symmetry is necessarily, it's kind of like the yin and the yang, right? It's like, or any of these Chinese philosophies where it rises to a point where there's a moment of balance and then it has to start moving again. Because otherwise it's...
Yeah. No, agreed. But
symmetry is rare. That's what I basically am trying to...
In the real world, but in fair fights, quickly become dominance games. That's, I think, a quote from your book.
Yeah, I think that if you're fighting one-on-one, like all animals in nature do, you're actually fighting for status over the other person, and that's the dominance fight game. And that's the you and me outside now, outside the bar on a Saturday night, or whatever it is. And, the whole paradigm of animals and how they fight, in the monkey dance, is that they show power and they try and subdue and overcome.
And you don't need martial arts for that.
No, you don't.
Even though we have these martial arts like MMA, whatever, based on that, you don't need martial arts for that. You need martial arts for...
I think that the dominance games to have status in the group are not necessarily the same as sport for money, even though it's the same paradigm, in that all sports for money were invented so people could gamble and to keep armies doing something to keep them entertained while there was peace. So that, you know, it's like everybody wants to make money gambling, and so that's probably why sports started out. And so they have to be repeatable. They have to be super evenly matched so that everybody will have a tense fight, and it has to be exciting because that'll and it has to be, you know, they have to come back next time.
Well, because it is theater, right? It's just improv theater.
Yeah, it's dominance theater. It's kind of like you and
I. Theater is dominance theater.
So you and I are watching, betting on, you know, the lion on the left, and I'm betting on the lion on the right, right? So we're entertained. We're eating our popcorn, right? That's the reason for it. Yeah. So you don't want either line to really die. You know, if I'm, you know, my line loses, I kind of want to come back next time and, you know, train the line up a bit and like take your lion this time, right? So it is the dominance fight paradigm, but it's not for the same reasons.
Yeah, but so this idea of not taking damage, which we were saying that, you know, you pointed out, lines up with, I have this long discussion in my book about how central invulnerability practices, magical invulnerability practices, as well as, you know, if you can really do it, if you can really make yourself invulnerable some way, that's even better. But it's certainly, invulnerability practices are a huge part of martial arts because they get you in the fight.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, can I was going to say something else now, and I can't remember exactly what it was. No, well, it'll come back, I suppose.
Yeah, but not taking damage.
Oh, okay. So, yes, so it was about that, in that if you listen to Bernard Hopkins, who was a famous boxer, talking about his career. He had a really long career. He got a title in his 40s. I mean, like crazy. He was really known for his defensive boxing. He didn't really get hit a lot, right? Mm-hmm. He very rarely got booked because an audience actually wants blood. So you'll actually see there's a huge debate in modern sports about the shortness of these guys' careers, because the promoter wants to get exciting fighters that will just kind of lay into each other and like take a lot of damage, and how really that's kind of like the opposite of skill, you know. And if you like, Bernard Hopkins was a very skilled fighter. A lot of defensive boxers are really skilled fighters. Vasily Lomachenko is one of my favorites. You know, luckily he's really fun to watch too, but he doesn't get hit, which is
Mayweather.
Yeah, Mayweather, exactly. You know, so I think it's really interesting, this sort of crossover between like not wanting to take damage. Obviously, when there's death on the table, like what you're talking about with your invulnerability practices, then yeah, absolutely. You don't want to die. You know, you want to fight for as long as possible so your side can win.
Mm-hmm. So, well, I was trying to tie this back to the idea of knowing people, like, right? Because you want to be able to, I think we both really agree on this, and I love Sun Upad's way of stating it, that first you want to be able to read people, and then you want to be able to write them. So I reading means I can see the openings, for instance. I know, I recognize the rhythm. I understand their body patterns. I can see what makes them emotional, what drives them.
Right? It's like reading the room.
It's poker. Yeah. And then I want to force them, their behavior. So I do little things that cause them. And once I can do that, then I completely control the fight.
Yeah, and so just to explain a little bit more, if that's confusing to people who are listening in that don't get the concept, it's that if somebody's super aggressive, I can use that. Masashi talked about it, Sun Tzu talked about it, all these guys that wrote books on strategy talked about it, is that I'll use something that you do as a predictor of how you will behave. And if you're easy to read, I can predict if you're going to be aggressive, if you're a counter fighter, if you're sneaky, if you're going to stab my back when I leave. You know, it's like, humans are fairly predictable creatures. So the job is to make them predictable and keep yourself unpredictable.
And so that's great. So then we have these characters, right? So what I recently was reading, or like, yeah, the first time I really tried to read it closely, the Three Kingdoms book, which is one of the religious classics of Chinese culture, one of the 4 or 5 major works that are of theatrical religion, and it's all about strategy. I mean, you can't read a page without coming to a new strategy, and sometimes they're just like, attack the mountain but leave a group in reserve when they come down the mountain and you attack from the left. Sometimes they're very clear like that, but some of the strategies are actually characters. So the characters themselves represent like whole sort of categories of strategy or types of strategy. So you can think of it, just to make it simple for us, the paladin, right? They fight in a very particular way, right? And there's the tough, right? It's about justice. They're not afraid to cross lines, but it's fundamentally about bringing things back to the way they should be, right? It's like a character, right? Or the bad guy who's always going to try and break the rules, and like Musashi, right? Pulling out his short sword. He's the bad guy, really, in that story.
Yes. Yes.
And then you have the trickster, which, okay, the trickster. One thing I kind of wanted to point out that I think is that I got because I've been studying Ghana, is because that's a culture that puts tricksters up high, as do the Chinese martial arts, which we can talk about more. But the trickster can also be the gentleman, the fox that can be very regal. The gentleman can also be the bad guy. The gentleman, I mean, the trickster can be, a loudmouth, bloviating, right? Obnoxious person, and then suddenly the quietest person in the room, right? The trickster has its own character, but also has the capacity to play other character roles. In
like
some sense, what's that?
Like an actor.
Oh, you caught that. Yes, that's where I was going. So I don't know. Did you want to talk about the hustler or the trickster anymore?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things I was going to point out is that everybody thinks you're cheating. If you they cheated, if you lose, you say they cheated. If you win, you call it strategy, that you were smart, right? So of course that has a different feel to it. So it's kind of fun. Everybody recognizes a trickster can be good or bad in a lot of ways, kind of depending on your point of view about what's going on. And of course, with any archetype, you don't really know what the big plan is, whether they have a big plan or not, or what the future comes in. So they're a really interesting character to bring in this idea of chance, and if that bad thing hadn't happened, then this good thing wouldn't have happened later on, kind of scene. So I think it's interesting, and it's kind of cross-cultural. Obviously, you have Loki in the Viking myths and stuff. There's always the guy that sort of messes stuff up and causes chaos, but it can also be pivotal in if you win or lose. And I think these ideas that people have been obsessed with for a really long time are chance and uncertainty, kind of wrapping around to that and trying to control them in some sort of way, like kind of, stacking the deck in your favor as much as possible. And whether that's through ritual or the ancestors or praying to the gods or whatever the thing is that you're doing, the auspicious day, we always try and stack the cards, and any life and death situation means the outcome is way more important than at even any other time, So I think they cause martial arts and strategy and war and all these conflict situations where death's on the table are like a microcosm of all our psychologies and our neuroses and psychoses and everything. It all brings it back in there, and maybe that's why martial arts are really fascinating.
Well, there's an idea I got from Liu Ming, which sort of ties in here, is that so everybody in China by the 1500 had a copy of this book with all the strategies in it, right? It's like, it's 1,000 pages of strategies. And, so, and basically, if you're lining up to fight somebody and you have good intelligence, obviously it's different if you don't, but if you have good intelligence, if you can see what they're doing, there is a best strategy response, right? There's a best strategy for your condition and their condition. But they have the same book, so then they can predict what your best, if they know you're using the same book, they can predict what your best strategy is and work against it. So some of the time you should use the best strategy, but also some of the time you should just use divination, roll the dice of some kind to pick a strategy. So they don't know if you're going to use the best strategy or just a random strategy, right? So that the ideal is that you actually have both.
Yes, I agree, because you want that element of uncertainty in there, and I think that's probably why chess and Go and all these games have become, have been popular throughout, millennia, because there's that, we both kind of know the rules of the game, so how does that work out? There's a story, and it's ridiculous. I quote it quite often because I read it somewhere and I can't remember exactly about it, and I'm probably quoting it completely wrong. But the concept I found fascinating about this guy that went to the Amazon rainforest to look at how the tribal people would pick a new place to burn for their next fields of, vegetables and stuff where they would set up camp. And apparently this tribe had a very complex system that involved the priests and the flights of birds and reading all this stuff, and it was like massively complicated. And this guy spent a really long time as an anthropologist down there, like working out where the birds were going, and how would that tie in with the weather next year, and like this whole rigmarole. And he did it for a very long time, and his ultimate conclusion that came to him in a kind of a flash of inspiration was that if you make it that complicated, it's completely random. And actually putting a new, burn or clearing a certain area for your, manioc or whatever it is you're growing, is actually by randomness, purely randomness, is actually safer than any other way. Because if your divination is slightly wrong, the more you do it, keeps you being more wrong. Whereas if it's, your 50-50 chance turns out actually to be the best option. So I thought that was actually a very fascinating thing.
Yeah. There's an enormous amount of divination in Chinese culture. It's integrated into everything. And that's in a sense the trickster thing. I mean, I did want to talk about that a little bit more. That in the 20th century, Tai Chi becomes this health practice, and it becomes this, it's got internal power or something, that kind of stuff. And they try to separate it from the story of Zhang Sanfeng. And so most people today think that that's like a false story, and that's sort of how it's taught, is that, well, people have this myth that it came from Zhang Sanfeng, but that's not true. And if it actually came from a theatrical character, Zhang Sanfeng, and was a representation of Zhang Sanfeng, then he really, that's the real thing. That is the real story. And he was a trickster, right? But he learned it from Xuan Wu. So who is Xuan Wu? Xuan Wu is like the mysterious warrior. So like taught Zhang Sanfeng in a dream. So the trickster's taught by this other guy, who's kind of like he's got a sword, right? He's got bare feet. He's like super ready to go. He's got a sword, a long sword. But he like drags it on the ground. Like he holds it. He doesn't have a scabbard. He's not depicted with a scabbard. He has his sword out and he drags it on the ground. And he's like the god of I don't give a fuck. That's what he is. He's basically like, I'm ready to go right now. I don't care what you throw at me. I am ready. So spontaneity for sure. but he's not a trickster.
Unconflicted.
Right. It's if you're familiar with the Tibetan tradition, it's like green Tara too. Just like I'm absolutely available for compassion, no matter what it is, whether it's comes out as a dance or as sexuality or as, caring for a baby or killing someone. I'm available for it right now. Right. He has that quality. It's like just super, perfect availability. But I think it's fun to call him the god of, of I don't give a fuck. So he teaches. That's the teacher of Zhang Feng, right? And Zhang Feng is an incredible trickster.
So why does he teach Zhang Feng? Why does he teach him?
Why? Oh, yeah. Why does he teach him? I don't know. But see, that's a good question. That's the kind of question we should ask. That's important. I just think it's sort of like, like that tricksters steal stuff. I mean, Anansi the spider in Ghana he steals the stories basically from some other gods, so he's the god of stories because he stole them all. But what does that mean? It's complex. These are ritual stories, right? So their meanings aren't necessarily set.
Right. I mean, stories are so fascinating because in a way it's how we preserve our wisdom in a lot of ways. I'm definitely one that believes that art is sometimes way more powerful than fact, for transmitting some level of understanding of certain events, right, and things like war or, any of these big things that are a little bit too big to really get a handle on. Art can have a lot of meaning, some sort of thing that you can take with you that gives you something, some anchor to hold on to or some framework that you can move forward with. And so I'm interested how, why we're so drawn to these things and we keep them alive, because a lot of these stories have been alive for a really, really long time. Like there's got to, like me with my martial arts, like, why do I do it? I saw it and I wanted to do it. I was like, there you go, that's it. Like, what is that? I don't need to understand it, but I'm fascinated by that. Like he had a dream, Zhang Feng had a dream, and he had like a muse come to him, or he has a flash of inspiration from this image of this guy doing something. And then we've created this whole, story and theater around this thing, back through the ages, and it's still with us with a different form to it. But, the moves are still there and we still do them. I'm sort of interested by that.
Well, okay. So, but why? So that's great. So there is a good answer to that question, which is that Zhang Feng is a teacher of the Golden Elixir. It's the primary way in which he was known. This Golden Elixir practice is pretty old. Yeah.
I just need to ask because there's one of the things I really found distracting in your book is I needed a different name for Golden Elixir, because even though I know that's what it's called, it kept me thinking about something in a drink. I need to have something, a different name for it rather than nectar of the gods. It's like can you put like some different wording around that?
Well, the Chinese word is jindan, sometimes neidan. Sometimes people call it the inner elixir, although I think that that's incredibly misleading, and so I don't use that as a practitioner. I don't use that. Yeah, is it possible to translate? So let's calling it for the moment just a form of meditation and not a martial arts practice, yes, right? Calling it a meditation practice. It's the actualization of visualizations as felt experience.
Okay, good. I like that way better than some drink.
Right. It's super. I mean, I appreciate you pointing that out, because these are the kinds of problems I had writing the book. It's like, how am I going to deal with this? Because it's like it's this whole thing, and I have to give it a name. I have to give it a name that people are going to just be okay with, so we can move forward, right? but yeah. So its primary characteristic, if you read texts about it, is that the practice flips the world upside down. It inverts things, and that's what Zhang Feng in the original story of Zhang Feng. He took Shaolin, or traditional martial arts at the time, and flipped them on their head. It's literally flipped them on their head and created Tai Chi.
And so why is that a good idea? Why do we need to do that?
Or making real fake and fake real. Well, why do you do that? Because the world becomes static. Like, people get too stuck in their ways, and they can't see, and they can't feel, and they can't think. And it's by that process of disruption, flipping the world upside down, that you are actually capable of seeing things as they are. A good teacher, your teacher, was constantly keeping you in this whirlwind of the unknown so that you wouldn't get stuck, right? And if you got stuck, he unfreezes you, right? And he unfreezes you by reorienting you. So to reorient, right, is to flip something upside down or twist it around, right? Again, we're using a spatial metaphor.
Right, yeah. So it's basically, you've got a thing, and instead of your viewpoint being up here, you've got somebody like dragging you around and say, what do you see from over here now, or whatever, right? So that.
Yeah. Or what if that was gone? What would you see? What if we just took that
kind of like the idea. Yeah. Or there is no ground, or it's one of those sort of like, what? So it makes you free fall in a sense. You let go of where you're at, and it's like a catalyst for taking away the world, or whatever you want to say, or reality,
and recreating it.
Okay.
Right. That is the golden elixir in a nutshell. That's the description. Good. The meditation practice, it just opens that possibility. And this is a fundamental to Chinese opera. It's like this meditation practice is in every Chinese opera, and it gives you invulnerability powers. Like, that's part of the story, is that it actually is its own invulnerability elixir.
Is that because you can see things exactly as they are, which means that in that way you're invulnerable, because it's like you see the whole multiverse all at the same time, and so then of course you're invulnerable to any threat?
At the end of your book, you describe Sunny Umpan as invulnerable. Do you want to do that? Well, why was he invulnerable?
Well, technically he wasn't invulnerable. I just think that his understanding of people meant that nobody was going to attack him.
But they also couldn't cut him. Like, they tried and they'd miss. And then
it's like, if somebody's sniping at him, on some ledge, could probably kill him. I'm not saying like he had like an iron shirt.
We're not talking about that.
What I'm saying is that the level of what he was invulnerable to has limits. So, but within his sphere, nobody was going to fight him when they saw him. When he was in one of his dark phases of his life, he would wander around really, really crappy neighborhoods of Oakland at 2 a.m, waiting for people to fight him. And everybody just took one look at him and was like, yeah, no. So in a sense, that's invulnerability, because he looked like somebody super dangerous, because he's stalking the streets at night at 2 a.m. despite being a tiny little Filipino man, right? Like, he was giving something off that was preventing the harm coming. Even if he was like, please come and fight me. And everyone was like, yeah, no, thanks.
Well, and you also described it as his perceptive capacities, right? Yeah. Made it so that people could in the square context of, I'm a teacher here, people could try stuff and just not be able to hit him. So it seemed like he was a ghost. Right?
Yeah. And it's like one of those things where it's very hard to know with a lot of people exactly where they're at, because he always made it easier. Like, he never really tried. Like, there's a real difference between somebody who's really, really trying. He was playing most of the time, but his level of play gave everybody else enough skills to actually get enough skills to really do damage to other people, if that was their, or protect themselves against bad guys, or whatever scenario you want to put in there. He got them to understand the skill set and the sword very well, so they were capable. But on some level, what was he capable of? I don't know, because I never saw it ever come out for real. It's very difficult to know.
Right. So, and then I just wanted to sort of lay it out like the Johnson Fung thing, right? It's just that, it's about being a trickster, right? It's a practice of being a trickster. So if that's true, right, and that's been hidden, then the actual practice can't be found. Like if it's actually a practice about being a trickster and you think it's about doing what my teacher told me over and over again, you'll never get it. But the moment you realize, oh, this is a trickster martial art, and he could fake being drunk and fake smelling really badly, and he had all of these powers. He's a sexual trickster too. He's a seductor, and then you start to move differently, right? And you think about it differently, and then you think, well, what if my teachers gave me exactly the wrong information?
Well, do you think it's wrong, or do you think it's just super limited?
I think most of the time there's like a beginning part, and I think this is true of Baguazhang too. The people learn all this material, which you can sort of use. You can sort of use it, but it doesn't really make you better than anybody else. And you can, maybe because you practice a lot of it, you're a little better. But it's the actual teaching. Just when you get it, it's absolutely world blowing. It just blows your entire world open, and you're like, whoa, that's exactly the opposite of what I learned. It's exactly the opposite. And now I know what everybody else thinks, and they don't know what I think. And you're like, I have a superpower.
And as the ever pragmatist, I would say that's when you understand tactics and psychology and other people. That it's like everything in your system is teaching you about body control and about yourself and cadence and where my left pinky finger is and where my right elbow is and my and how I use that all together, but it has zero tactics.
You have to throw that out. You have to throw that out. That's a mistake.
But for me, it's like it's all to do with me. It's nothing to do with
right,
where I am or when I am. Like those two questions do not get answered. Right. It's just it's not martial art yet because there's nobody else involved. The other chaotic element into the whole thing is gone. And so what you're talking about is this inspiration of letting go of all the form stuff is, to me, is that because you understand people and what they're going to do, there's nothing to remember anymore. Right? It's like, it's not that hard. If we go back to it's not that hard to cause damage. It's much harder to avoid it. It's like, the avoiding part is super to do with understanding them and, three-dimensional space and time and rhythm and people's brains and minds and taboos and movement quality and injury, like all that stuff that you intuit because we're human beings and we're built for that. I think is a very interesting thing, which reminds me of the original thing I wanted to come back to. Where at the beginning of the conversation you talked about health being nothing to do with the forms, right? And I was like, I disagree with you. I need to come back. I'm remembering it now, because the part that I want to say is that the human body is designed to work on this planet, in this space, doing the stuff that we do. And so the fact that it's healthy is kind of obvious if you're using this designed object to work like it's meant to work. So it's like a byproduct, because of course it is, and if my mind is totally in tune with what's going on with the other people, and I understand now this moment, and I'm saying yes to the moment, I can see it, that too is then me being in harmony with the relationship of the other person and me. So it's almost like being in tune, like you're resonating with this, and I can influence it, like I'm playing.
No disagreement there. So what I was saying before, and I think it's easy to get lost because people have, and this is key, this is something, there was an orientation that everyone had before the 20th century in China, if we're talking about that subject, and that no one has now. Almost no one has. And that's why I wrote the book, because I was like, wow, you get this piece and this entire field just opens up like a flower, and you can see the whole thing crystal clear. But it's something people had before that everybody had that like almost nobody has. And that thing is this idea of the golden elixir. And the golden elixir is what it was itself a healing practice. It's categorized fundamentally. A part of it is what it does is it heals you. How does it heal you? By returning you to your original nature. That's what it does. It returns you to your original nature. And when you get it, it just starts remaking your body. And that's what the word Jing is, like the three treasures, Jing, Qi, and Shen. Jing is your physical body that's remade by the practice. So the golden elixir is sometimes described as you transform or you smelt, is the actual word, is to smelt. You smelt the Jing to produce Qi. You smelt the Qi to produce Shen, or spatial imagination is usually how I translate it. You smelt Shen, and then you return to emptiness. And then you start over. It's a continuous process. But that actual process of getting the order, what I call the order of perception action, correct, that correct meaning the original nature, what we are as animals, what we evolved, the way we evolved before we became humans, walking on 2 feet and carrying things. That nature is self-healing. And what it does is it consolidates Jing, consolidates the physical body into it and purifies it of, in the Chinese, in the language of exorcism, it purifies it of ghosts. It gets rid of the ghosts, but it purifies it of, you could say in psychological terms, of all your bad habits. It clears the ways in which you hold tension in your body, or compress, or extend too far. It cleans all of that stuff up. And if you have that basic framing, then you can look at all these practices and go, oh, that's just a sidecar. Oh, that just got pulled out of the golden elixir. Like, oh, that part of the Tai Chi that's healthy, that's the golden elixir part. That, because it's still there. So anyway, that's my and the word internal, by the way, while I'm ranting, the word internal actually means inward, because the Jing goes inward to consolidate, and that's what the word really means.
Yeah, I guess I'm mildly more pragmatic in that I just think that that bit that's missing that you were talking about, that people used to understand and don't. I mean, that's why I wrote my book, and perhaps why you wrote yours, is that it's like, we know this shit. It's just you've forgotten to look at it because you've got, you're looking at the finger and not at all the heavenly glory, right? I mean, it's that same sort of thing where we're like, or this idea of attainment, that we're trying to attain these things. And in a sense, you're not going to get there by trying so hard, but we still need path. But I think, sorry, that was very confused, wasn't it?
No, I followed it. I don't know if other people follow it.
But I think, if I'm thinking correctly, what you and I have in common, and what maybe the golden elixir has, but I still want a better name for it, because that still makes me think of a little goblet with something golden in it.
I was calling it Jindan, and then I decided that would throw people off because it's a Chinese word.
Okay.
But yeah,
anyway, it is this imagination expanding part, is that it's not like this and then taking something away and suddenly somebody going, oh man, shit, it's like there's no railing, now I'm on like shaky ground. It's that kind of shake, is to say it's bigger than this. It's like, look further, don't be all enclosed by it. Look over the wall, and the view's big, go big. And of course, when we try and put all this stuff into words, it sounds completely like nonsense, but I think is common to a lot of spiritual teachings. It's just harder to find in martial arts and more pragmatic skills, perhaps. Zen does this, right, with their koan and whatever they're doing. And Taoism has this to a certain extent too. It's like removing the ground and letting you drop a little bit, and then you have to catch yourself and go, oh wow, I never thought of that. The way I described training with Sunny was that I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. It was confusing. It was super chaotic, but I kept going back because I was fascinated, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I got to go back. And then when I finally started to see a little bit, like his see, it really felt like somebody took a bag off my head and said, what do you see now? I mean, you know, I wrote that in the book, and it sounds very similar to this experience that you're talking about.
I think it is. I actually think it's the same. And I, you know, what I'm describing is a particular cultural framing that unlocks what the Chinese martial arts are about, right? That's that. But the accessibility to the golden elixir, I as a human experience, I find it in African dance all the time. In some ways, it's a better way to access the consolidation of Jing, is in African dance. And that's why I really think people need to train cross-culturally. And why one of the reasons why you and I get along is because we're like, yeah, don't get stuck in one cultural view. You need at least three cultures. 4 or 5 is probably better. I I wanted to ask you about weapons.
Yes.
Because well, I could construct a question, I guess. Let me construct a couple questions, and then you can. One thing, in my martial arts practice, I'm focused on emptiness. So you touch me, you cannot possibly figure out what I'm going to do next by touching, because I'm giving you completely false signals, or I'm giving you no signal, right? And in some ways, the sword makes this really easy. You can just touch, and they can't actually feel you, and you can fake, and you can you know, there's so much you can do because they're not really touching you. That and so it opens up some of what I would, from the touch point of view, the much higher level skill set that I think you have. You're like, you jumped you jumped the empty arm because you're just using the sword, and so Sonny did that, and I think that's one reason why he was teaching that way.
Do you think the sword was the, you know, the key to understanding? Not that it's the same as empty hand arts, because you don't need power for sword. So there's different body mechanics and stuff. You know, there's different things that you do in empty hand or with impact weapons that you don't do with sword. But sword's the only weapon, it's unique, that involves no power to do lethal harm. And it takes away any size disparity. It takes away any power disparity. Maybe height gives you a little bit of advantage, but it's the most leveling confrontation that you can, you know, have, really, if two people have swords that don't need any other thing that could be put asymmetry into the system. And we're just talking one-on-one, obviously. And so then what else is there? It's like your game of chess or Go, you know, that whole idea of, like, if one person knows your strategy, you both read the same book, what else can you control? Like, what else is it that you get to put asymmetry back into the system in your favor? And so the sword gives you that opportunity, because they can't just run at you and overwhelm you. They can't unless they're going to die. And if the plan is not to, then how? You know, and so it brings those questions to the fore. So I think on that level, yeah, I think sword is one of the best weapons to learn tactical thinking and learn about other people there is, honestly. Short blade's different because I can reach you with my other hand, so it's not exactly the same. But swords, there's enough space and distance that is dangerous, if you like, that creates a paradigm in which you can play this stuff quite interestingly.
Well, what about blades as you know, the idea of I'll call it the magical quality of the live blade?
What about that?
Yeah, I mean, so either imagining that the blade is live, right, or actually working with live blades changes everything.
Yes, it does. I think we have a genetic memory of what a blade can do to the human body. I mean, everybody at some point, well, maybe not nowadays because people don't cook that much, but has cut themselves in the kitchen. You know, you understand that, but I think there's something very deep in us all that understands what damage a sword can do. I'm not sure what we can carry through thousands of years, but it's the only tool that humans have invented and I'm not talking about blades, but the sword particularly, that was only has one job, and that's to kill people. It's not used for anything else. It kills people. The sword kills people. And I think we all know on some level we have that inner feeling of like, ugh, you know, it's a scary object. It's like if you're not used to being around firearms, it's like being around firearms. It's like a very dangerous object. You know, if somebody pulls out a live weapon in my presence, I step back until I'm out of range of them swinging it, especially if it's some idiot that's just doing something with it. It's like, yeah, no. It's a very frightening, powerful thing. And you can sort of understand and see why historically people have associated it with magic, you know, because it's this weapon that can effortlessly take life, effortlessly, with like nothing. I mean, I can literally walk towards somebody with doing nothing with it and walk through somebody and take their life. There's like nothing. So there's that aspect. And then I think, you know, we can feel it on the other end, that lethality, but then also it can kill me just as easily as it can kill you. Like I can injure myself by being sloppy with it. So in a sense, just like with a firearm, you know, in modern times in America, you know, if I'm pulling it out of a holster or I'm doing something with it, I can shoot myself in the leg. I can shoot myself with this thing just the same as I can shoot somebody else. And so you see this massive respect around it, and this idea that you want the sword to be on your side and kill the other person but not injure you. And so therefore you kind of venerate this magic again to give it, you know, up your odds and, you know, have it work for you instead of against you. It's a really fascinating weapon, I think.
That was awesome. There's a similarity to masks and swords,
Yeah.
I think. You know, masks, well, they unhook you from reality. They take you into some liminal space. Masks are always, in every culture I've ever looked at, masks, and puppets too, they're handled with extraordinary care, often, you know, in some kind of very special bag and then put in a box and like kept, and people make offerings to them as if they were alive, sacrifices even. And, you know, because like when you put them on, they actually change your capacities, right? And as a sword does. And I was wondering if you could talk about the way in which people care for weapons.
I'm no expert, honestly. All I can really tell you is stories of other people. I don't have a big collection or anything like that. I do know that when I hold old blades, I like to touch old blades if people have like a collection that I can. The last thing I went to up in Vancouver, there was some sick guys that brought a bunch of their old swords with them to show people. And I can tell you there's a real power to old swords when you hold them that have really been used, and that they vary. Some are very bloodthirsty. They actually feel cold and dark and weird. And other ones actually feel very sad. Other ones feel very light and bright. I mean, it's fascinating, honestly. I mean, it's all like, woo, but they really have a personality. And they make offerings in the Philippines and Indonesia and a lot of places to their weapons, and you present them in the room in a certain orientation, not just to people coming into the room as far as like, are you willing to kill them, but just for the sake of the weapon itself. There's a lot of superstition around buying old swords, like what's in it, and if it comes to you, is that energy appropriate for you? Right. You know,
whose spirit is in there, right?
Yeah, and it's like, is it a killing sword, and should you really have a killing sword, and is that good for you? You know, or you know, do you want one that's got bad juju or good juju, or how, you know, what's in it? And the analogy that somebody said, you know, if you want to go to something more pragmatic, is certain dogs work with certain owners. It's like your sword is like your faithful, trusted guard dog, and certain owners shouldn't have certain dogs. You know, certain dogs can turn on their owners, and certain dogs won't protect their owners or will dominate their owners, right? So you have this relationship with this object that can save your life, but it also has a kind of an intellect or an intelligence of its own that can decide whether or not it helps you. And so a lot of where they sit in the house and which way they face and Sonny would always wrap his live weapons that perhaps he didn't trust in silk, so it's actually tied up, and so the energy doesn't come out.
Bondage, yeah.
And so I think that there's the same one about this one draws blood every time you pull it out, it wants to eat blood, and it's true. I have one knife that every time I pull it out the sheath, I cut myself with. It's like the weirdest thing. It's like it wants it. It's just like, maybe it's just super sharp and I'm not careful enough, but you could kind of see where these myths come from, or these feelings about things, and who's to say if they're not true,
But masks, you have a similar relationship. So Keith Johnstone's work on masks, it's like, you don't know in the mask world, the world of masks. I can't say this is absolutely universal, but in his teaching, and I think it's true in many places, you don't just go, I want to wear that mask. It's like the mask has to choose you, and there are rituals for seeing if the mask accepts you, right? So maybe you go, it's a little bit like how they pick the Dalai Lama. It's like you go, okay, so there's a mask, and okay, you've got choice of these masks, pick one up, and put it on, and then you're gonna look in a mirror for a split second, and then you're gonna go over to table and pick an implement, and there'll be like different implements, and it's like, and people are watching, like, did it come alive or not? If not, no, that's not the mask for you.
So it's like the swing. We're back to swing again. We're back to that sort of like weird place where there's swing.
Yeah, I mean, or we could try to be psychological and talk about the collective unconscious or something. But I think it's not obviously material, but it's definitely there and reproducible.
Well, it's again relationship, right? It's again your relationship to the mask, everybody else's relationship with watching you in the mask.
Yeah,
it's that sort of resonance, if you like, that comes when everything's right or appropriate or whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, it's an inconceivably massive collection of people's experiences all mixed together, right?
Yeah, it's good. Just so you know, my battery on my computer is a little bit temperamental, so if I suddenly disappear, it's not because I hate you, it's just because
you become an enlightened being and you're like floated away. I had this thought when I was reading your book. I was like, you were talking about the things that martial arts don't teach that are like obvious questions, like, well, okay, this is the setup for stabbing the person, but then what do you do afterwards, right? And then you're like, well, there are all these traditional movements of like pushing someone away, and then doing the next thing, right? And I was like, oh, that explains Fa Jing better than anything, right? The Tai Chi push away. It's like, oh, you gutted them, now you push them away because there's somebody else, right?
Yeah, or they're still alive. It's like you got to exit. Yeah, you need a way to get out from danger.
So I mean, I don't know. I could endlessly talk about my book, but I feel like I need some other way to bring it forward because I got to get people to read it. It's too complex for even like a 2-hour conversation.
Yeah, no, I think your book is. I think your take on this idea of this hidden element within martial arts is really worthwhile. I mean, I think you're confrontative by nature, and so you have left some sort of your obtuse things in there that might not be immediately accessible to some people. But I do like this idea as a meta plan for your book as being the golden elixir for people, in effect, that you are taking the ground out from underneath their feet, so people read it and suddenly go, oh shit, there's something up beyond the wall, right? So on that level, that kind of makes me happy that in itself it's kind of turning everything upside down for people. And I think the historical part is really hard because it's full of Chinese names. At least I found it was. but I think it's fascinating that you've obviously done this massive amount of research on it. The part that I got the most out of is the bagua section in the back, literally talking about bagua itself and Najar and everything. And I think that's the part that bagua practitioners and internal martial artists should read. Though I think your first book, Possible Origins, probably has a bigger audience just because a lot more people do Taiji than they do bagua. You know,
the first half of the book. Yeah,
exactly. And so the bagua part, I think maybe you're going to have to write another one just about why bagua is interesting and huge and about meditation, and then they'll access this one a bit more.
So Maija, this is what happened to me, right? I was like, I a couple years ago, I was sitting there and I had 60 or 70 pages of a Tai Chi book, 60 or 70 pages of a bagua book, and 60 or 70 pages on the golden elixir and martial arts. And I talked to two people who I trust and are experts and authors, and they said, nope, you got to make that one book. And I said, you're kidding me. And my wife was like, yeah, one book. I don't want you writing 3 books. That's take forever. So for whatever reason, I was like, I saw the logic to it because they are all interrelated, and the introduction in some ways is the same for all of them. And the golden elixir connects to both the Tai Chi and Baguazhang. So there was a way to do it, but it meant I had to go, I'm going to have to leave out 90% of what I know.
Yeah, you need to stick in the other 90%, it's like...
Well, that's why I'm doing these videos.
It's like, there's so much more history I want in here. I want the scene to be set for me. I want these characters to appear just like in a movie. This is sort of the cliff notes. Like I found it's like, well, this is because of this and this and this and this. And I'm like, hang on a minute. Who was this guy? Where are we? What's it look like out there? Is the sun shining? What do people believe? What's going on? It's like you and I have talked about all the stories about the brothels and the boats and, actors and like that. That is an amazing piece of history. And it's like a paragraph.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it has to be bigger because it's nuts. It's like the history, like I said, was just all names to me. And I was like, I want more of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as far as people understanding internal arts, there's a bit of the bagua in the back, and the Najar thing is really good. And I'm really happy that I was watching Investiture of the Gods on Amazon. So I got a bit more ideas about this idea of immortals and gods in there. But that's massive. I mean, you could put in so much more about that. But I think this was...
But recognize the problem, right? So the problem is, like in a book, right? Like, first of all, I cannot neglect, because some people read it and just didn't get it already. That's happened. I cannot neglect the fact, this idea, and you had a lot of time to talk to me, right? But this idea of the YMCA consensus, I could not neglect that China was conquered by a worldview that then suppressed its previous worldview. That if you don't get that basic idea, you have no idea why you would have the wrong story.
But
right?
You kind of chuck it in as though it's a given, and it would have been much better to talk about...
I tried 3 times in the book to explain that, but it's hard for people, right? Like, you're willing to set your opinions aside, because I know you're willing to set your opinions aside and go, well, what is he saying? Right?
Yes. And again, it's like the YMCA consensus is weird, right? I wanted you to talk more about the Cultural Revolution and this idea of, I mean, you mention you're trying to get rid of all these bourgeois ideas and the superstition and the feudalism and all this craziness, and we have to modernize and come up with the rest of the planet, but in our own way, and we're going to do this modern thing, and all you people can go away. And then you also talk about the Christians coming and sort of influencing, but that's a huge novel by itself too.
No, so, absolutely, yeah.
It's like there's more scene setting. So then when you say YMCA consensus, it has it's like introducing a character. It's like, this is Bob, and it's like, who's Bob? Where's Bob come from, and why is this a real person? I wanted more character building.
It's tough, and I don't claim to be a writer. I had this vision, and I felt like it needed to get out there because it's right. I mean, that's my reason. I mean, if somebody could dispute it, but they have to at least engage with what I said. And so, once you get that out of the way, right? Once you have that, which scholars didn't need to hear, because all the scholars of Chinese religion and know this already, right? So and that is, I did kind of treat it that way. I was like, okay, if you don't know this, I can't start the next conversation. So you're going to have to trust me a little bit. Here's the reading material, right? There is. And there's nothing I could do about it other than rewrite what other people had written, in that sense. It's such a big subject.
I think you could write it a lot better. I think maybe you need to do another investiture of the God series, which is in 65 parts, but you're starting kind of like as
my decision was I was going to do this. It's an introduction to the problem.
Yes.
And the rest is video. Like for at least the next few years. The rest is I've got to do in video. And by the way, if people want me to do a full video on the history of Bagua, send me some money. I will put it in an account until I get $100,000, and then I will make the best ever movie about the history of Bagua.
Well, I think you should write a novel, and with all these, with a few different characters from these different ideas, like you want
a lot of stuff there, isn't there? There's a lot of possibilities. Yeah. No, that's what I hope it does for people, is they go, wow, he could have totally gone this direction. He could have totally gone this direction, right? But the thing is, like, right, this god Naja, like, people don't get, like, I'm introducing something, and they may have been studying Chinese culture for 10 years, especially if they started a long time ago, right? Maybe 20 years, and not come across Naja as an important god. But he was like the most important. I mean, really up there as the most important. And
and again, his backstory, I think it would have been really nice, because like you said, I think the book comes over as though this is true, this is true, this is true, because you want to get those out of the way and get on with the thing. And I was like, but Naja, what? It's like, yes, you talk about him, but it's sort of like, it's got to be longer. So
yeah. So you wanted a 400-page book just on the history of Bagua.
I wanted
it's not the length, it's the detail, right?
Yeah, I think I wanted the characters fleshed out a little bit more, instead of just appearing, because I think it's so fascinating. And especially even if it was just that balance between the Qing dynasty fall and the next bit, even if it was sort of compressed into that time period, you could have all the old archetypes in the first part, and then this weird transition of foreigners and culture, like all this stuff in there, and this new section, and like what is missing, like what got lost, and like let's look back into this time and why this is so connected to this other part, and then this chaos.
But here's the other problem, right? Is that I was doing this work by myself, and I'm like, if I had like a 10-person research team, could you imagine how good this could be? Because all I'm doing is scratching the surface. It's true. All I'm doing is scratching these little surfaces. And can you see in that window? Okay, now look over here. Can you see in that window? Or can you see in that window? Because that's actually how my brain works. It's a giant cloud, and I just pull stuff down.
This is your brain for sure on paper. I'll give you that much.
Thank you.
But what I guess is, like, I don't have a problem, but like, I think there's a lot of truth that you get told in stories. Like I was saying, art is often more powerful. So this is why I want you to actually write a fictionalized book, but that has all this shit in it as real.
So I was thinking about this morning, and we should probably wrap up soon. Although I could easily talk to you for 3 hours, but let's shoot for 2. So there's this story that every Bagua practitioner learns, right? That there's the Deng Haichuan, the creator, supposed creator of Bagua, was somehow working for the Su prince, right, in this mansion, the Su mansion or castle, mini little castle inside the city. And it was a really crowded party with tables. And he there was a death penalty. Usually the story goes there was a death penalty for delivering food cold, and he and nobody could get through the crowd because it was too thick. It was too dense. And so he put the plate of food, up in his hand, and he jumped or danced or bagua along all the tables and delivered it to the Sioux Prince. And that was how he was revealed as the master. And the Sioux Prince, asked him some questions, and then he replaced the other guy. That's sort of the story, right? Now, I found some evidence, which it's mostly from talking to scholars, China scholars, that this stuff probably came from radio plays in the 1920s and 30s. And then they just changed all the names. But that's something that's pretty hard to prove. And I really needed better language skills to do it, for one, because this would have been stuff in dialect, and we don't have the radio plays weren't recorded. They're just people writing down what was said. So it's like, that's rough, right? But the story came down to however it got to people, it came down, and it has a bunch of fascinating stuff in it. Because if you look at the story, right, okay, so the Sioux Prince, we know a lot about the Sioux Princes, okay? They had 20 eunuchs by law. They had 20 eunuchs. Deng Hai-Chuan is supposed to be a eunuch. And the eunuchs were involved in serving food, for sure. That was like full-time. They didn't have waiters. They had eunuchs. And the Sioux Princes were all known for being superb opera performers. There were also princes, Manchu princes, which means that they knew archery and horseback and wrestling. Was as just a ground a Manchu prince for sure knew those things. So they were warriors. They practiced warriorness, but they were also amateur opera performers. And when you threw a party, and this was a party, you had opera performance, period. There's no such thing as the Sioux Prince putting on a party without opera. That was it, and they probably performed too. And there were 300 eunuchs in the imperial city who were opera performers for the imperial palace. We don't know that much about them, or I haven't been able to find out that much about them, but that the fact that they were there and that was their job. We also know that they brought in performers from outside who would sometimes spend the night, although that was illegal. And so they were trained. Obviously, the Sioux Prince was training with opera people. The other thing is that when you have an opera performance, you set up a lot of tables and it's really crowded. That's exactly the description of an opera performance. And we even know that where those were held in the Sioux Palace, because the Sioux Palace is well documented. It was donated to the British during the Boxer Uprising because it was used to defend against the Boxers and to house Chinese Christians, thousands of Chinese Christians who fled into Beijing during the uprising. So we know that building and like where that story, if that story is real, which it probably isn't, but we know, right, where that would have happened. And we also know that the Naja performances were super popular. We even know that the imperial princess loved the Naja story. So she had favorite actors who were Naja performers. So there's this content is super rich, right? And Naja, right, is the best fighter in all of the country, right? That's his legend. And the city of Beijing is called Naja City. So it's like, that's the piece that was missing from that story, right? Is the context.
Well, there you go. That's the set for your play or your film or your screenplay or whatever it is, right? It's like that's the centerpiece, and then you can flash back and then you can flash forwards. It'd be perfect.
Yeah, I am going to do some kind of performance piece. I am working on that. It's, it's definitely it.
More, Scott.
More is good. More is good. I need a team. If people want to come out here and work on the history of Bagua, I need a team. I need help.
No, it should be the novel, the Naja Bagua novel.
Yeah, I don't want to. I'm an extrovert. I can tell you this COVID-19 thing driving me nuts. I need people.
Yes, no. I realized when this whole thing shut down that, I think some people do martial arts maybe for therapy or for things like that. I'm a performance artist. I do it because there's other people involved. Like I teach because there's students. There's interaction. The relationship is missing, right? So I never thought of myself that way until this COVID-19 thing, but it's true. It was an interesting feeling to realize that the relationship is missing without it. So.
I do want to say about your teaching that it's fantastic, and if people get a chance to study with you, or bring you somewhere, your insights into into everything, as is obvious, are totally worthwhile. And if you do any kind of knife fighting stuff, it's great. We didn't cover our mutual connection to Ed Calderon at all, so we're gonna have to talk again, I think, is what this comes down to. What a pleasure.
Yeah, that was super fun. Thanks, Scott. I'm glad my computer battery held out.
Yay! Well, until we meet in person, take care.
Yes, until such time, as they say, more time. And yes, another 3-hour coffee session would be a fantastic thing.
And everybody, please buy both of our books.
Yes, buy both our books.
Bye.
Bye.
So thank you. Woo.
Yes.
You can find links to all 4 of our books down below, as well as both of our Patreon accounts. And if you like this stuff, please subscribe.